Welcome to or welcome back to the NEI Pioneer Podcast, our end of year wrap-up show. And I am so happy to be here with the team. You guys know these guys from hosting the show many times previously. Ryan is at my left. We've got Hannah, Callie, and of course, the B-man, Brice. What we planned on covering, we wanted to do something different for the end of 2024 wrap-up, was to say, okay, what did we think collectively of the shows? You know, what influenced us? What did we enjoy? What were some of the results? And hopefully getting some feedback from you guys out there. Today, what we're going to discuss is why we started the show, how this year has gone, the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations of creating a new podcast, some of our favorite moments, and of course, the funniest moments that happened throughout the year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brice.
Yeah, let's get started here with the why. You know, we've talked about, I think even in the episode with Stefan, which is one of our first 3 episodes that we, launched with, and you guys talked about creating the brand of Pioneer starts here, and he wanted to, have a podcast, be a part of that. I know before, even you got here, Jonathan, he was wanting to have a podcast. So when you're coming up with the brand of Pioneer starts here, where did you see a podcast fitting in, what we're trying to do here as a marketing team and a larger whole for NEI?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's another avenue to share the brand. I think the tricky part was coming up with the whole Pioneer platform, because I know, you guys have heard it yourselves. We got collectively a lot of pushback. Why do you need a podcast? How does it fit into the portfolio? Pioneer starts here. The whole epiphany for that was really, when you walk into a mall and you see that sign that says "You are here," that's really where it all started. Because frankly, I'm not from Northeast Indiana. I don't know if people outside of Northeast Indiana know exactly where it is. So I figured, starting with geographical, this is where we are. I think with the podcast, what I saw was, as I was interviewing you guys and hiring you guys, I was thinking holistically about, are we diverse enough? Do we have younger and older groups? We've got a couple of people on the team that are just a couple years out of college. I think what I wanted to do is get real conversations of the real people who did it. And I figured we could have just gone audio. I didn't want to do that. I figured video is such a strong part of the storytelling component that I wanted people to be real and have honest discussions about why they did it. Why did they do it here? What made them stay here? What made them come here? I think video is the best way to do that, because you can tell simultaneous integrated stories with one story. And I think that's really where that came from. Get people involved, get them to tell us what their story is. Everybody's got a story, and all stories and all storytellers aren't created equal. But I figured if we could get enough people in there with diverse backgrounds, I thought that would be a really good human interest.
Going back to the beginning again, the creation of the podcast, Hannah wasn't here yet, Callie wasn't here yet, I wasn't here yet. Before, the idea of let's get a podcast started. The only people were here for the podcast idea were you and Ashton.
Yep.
You guys were the ones that, put the stuff on the walls, creating the studio. And then, we all 3 come in here. Ryan, you've been here for quite a long time. But you were also, we wanted to bring you in because, you have this knowledge base and stuff like that. So let's talk about creating the team. Because it was a lot of meetings, at the very first podcast meeting that I was in, this 5 host idea wasn't even a thought that we had. It was like, who's going to be the lead person of this? How can we get everybody in the team involved? And we stuck on this idea of, hey, let's have a rotating thing of hosts of people with certain specialties. And that's how, it got started and we've took off.
I remember that Saturday afternoon of Ashton, Stefan, our CEO, and me in that studio hammering things to the wall, soundproofing and doing all that. It was all hands on deck to do it. Everybody at this table was selected for a very specific reason. Hannah is, her title is videographer, but she handles all the lighting. She handles all the edits. I knew she was a pro from the first time I spoke with her. And I think I told you that. You with your background in sports and journalism, I knew that you could not only host the show, but you could write about it. And I knew that everybody brings something more to the table than their title. So Callie, a producer extraordinaire and somebody who knows video, but also knows how to produce. And Ryan, nobody, I would argue nobody in NEI, in the organization or our partners knows more about economic development than Ryan Twiss. And I said, he's such a charismatic guy. And one of my best friends. So it was no mistake and there was no error. I knew that with this collective, we overlapped each other just enough that we could handle almost any subject.
How did you guys feel, as the podcast comes in to the fold? Obviously, you guys started a couple months before me. How were you guys feeling as we are talking about podcasts and then ramping this thing up? Because when I got in, it was 2 months and we were off the ground with our first one.
Yeah, I think something that Jonathan has said a lot just about this whole process. It's you're making the plane, or what's the
You're
line?
making the car while you're driving
Yeah,
it.
making the car
Yeah.
while you're driving
And
it.
we
you know?
were.
We were. I mean, I don't know. I kind of visually imagine me and Callie just like on the side of the road, and we're just like running with the car as it's running, and Jonathan's pulling us on and like trying to make it work. And he's like, here's a drill, start working.
While flooring it.
Yeah, while
Yes.
flooring it.
It's
No breaks
That's
at
no
all.
joke. And I'll tell you something else, because Hannah, I remember you coming in and not liking some of the equipment.
Mhm.
So what did I say? Go ahead.
Fix it.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
tell me what you want. I think Hannah had.
And you'll explain it to Aaron.
Hannah has. Yeah, I'll take care of the explanation.
We'll
to
tell
our
the CFO. You handle it.
But we all have our comfort zones, and particularly with Hannah, we had to make sure that she was comfortable with the equipment because she's the primary one using it. So if we're going to hit the ground running on something like that, it's not easy to do. None of us had ever worked together. Ever. And I think that's important, that you took a group of people, you pushed them together with this ambiguous show that talks about the stories of the people who did it here in Northeast Indiana, and make a real show out of it. And with the results that we've been getting, I couldn't be more pleased. But I knew with each one of you, and I remember telling you on the phone too, Brice, I said, you're hired. You got to go through the system here, but I don't care.
Yeah. And I remember telling you months later, I was like, I think you're full of.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Like
And so did
that
your
was
wife.
my thought when we're talking on the phone. It's like, who does this as a hiring person? Like, just says you're hired on the spot. I mean, unless it's a real shady job or real, but it's
Edit.
but it's not that.
Edit.
Yeah. Some lessons learned, at least at the beginning, because there's so much that goes into it. It's not just we come into a room or we go into the studio and we flip the mics on and we go. Because like I said, we had numerous meetings about it, how we're going to attack this, who we're going to have on, who are the hosts going to be, what direction, what tone, all that stuff. A lot of people, when they want to start a podcast, they don't even think about that stuff. Like, oh, I just want to go in there and talk. And
taking into account who's your humility,
yeah, and
that people may not want to talk.
And it's like, how did we get here to this point? And we're kind of taking you inside the weeds here of how it got started, but it's not just going in and turning on the mic. We had to think about and plan and draw on the whiteboard numerous amount of times to get this thing started.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that I learned on the producing side. There's just some things that you can know best practices, but you're not going to know what works best for you and your show and your team until you have tried a couple of things. So there's definitely some different things that we found that have been super helpful. Like me and Hannah really prioritize having preliminary conversations with all the guests to make sure that they understand what the show's about and they know what they're getting themselves into and they know the requirements and all of those things. They're really helpful for them to know on the front end. And yeah, there's a bunch of little things like that with my job that I feel like we've learned along the way.
I'd be interested in your take on this, because Ryan, you haven't been around multimedia like we have.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think one thing I don't advertise very often is I was actually a telecommunications major in undergrad at IU, where I focused mostly on in-studio video production. So it's been a long time since I was like in the weeds on that, but it was kind of like riding a bike as far as the comfort level in front of the camera with the microphones, kind of understanding, and then having this amazing team that you've assembled really coach me through that process. What's really what I've really enjoyed about it is, when we initially renovated our space, well before even Stefan joined the team, we named that room the studio. And the intent was someday it would be able to host something like a podcast, but we never even like really took the next step on that outside of naming that room the studio. So it was always in the back of the mind that it could be something, but I'll be honest, I had no expectation that it would be this good, this high quality, or this viewed, that it would have this much traffic is just blown my expectations completely.
And speaking of which, I know when we were interviewing Hannah and I was watching her YouTube channel for her company, she would go up there and explain how to use, certain whatevers. And I was so impressed with it. And I remember in my first conversation with you, Hannah, I said, okay, so as you're going through this, who's giving you direction and stuff? And she said, no one. And I was like,
It's just me.
hired. So if you wouldn't mind talking about that, because I'm sure this is a much different than where you came from.
Yeah, so this is my second job out of college. And so as someone who's worked in YouTube and videography, I'd never done a podcast before. I've learned a lot of, skills. I had to kind of learn how to apply that to a podcast, which was kind of a learning curve, but it was something that I think in our job interview, it just a lot of the experience I had somehow lined up with that, having to, at my last job, create a studio space kind of out of nothing in a warehouse, and how to create, a YouTube channel from the ground up, all these like little pieces is like, oh wait, I've done this before, maybe a little different. But it was exciting to step into this role and do that here in a new way.
Yeah, I think it's no matter what, at its essence, it's still storytelling, no matter what we do. I think with Hannah's expertise in lighting and sound and things like that, it took us to a whole new level because, yeah, I came up with the idea and I came up with the brand, but frankly, the execution of it was even better than I expected. And coming from where I came from, that was huge.
You hit on something earlier that I think is really fascinating and telling about this whole process, and that the Hoosier humility. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get people to tell their own story, as impressive or authentic as it may be.
In real time.
But at its core, a community is just made up of its people. It's just a collection of its people. So pulling the stories out of some of our most impressive residents who have really pioneered their own path forward, right?
Yep. Wink.
It's not always easy, but what a powerful way to get the word out about everything great happening in Northeast Indiana is to have people tell their own stories as opposed to us trying to tell it or having some other spokesperson do it on their behalf.
Exactly. Everybody has different reasons for what they do, and everybody's got a story. Like I said, it's one of those things where you just want to get people to tell it in their own words. If we're providing a narrative, that's not as good.
Right.
It's just not.
Now, I know there's one more lesson, Callie, that we've learned as a marketing team that we joke about a lot, but I feel like the listeners should be included in this lesson because we learned it for them. So
we learned the hard way, guys. If you've watched the episode with Kathy and Audrey from DeBrand, if you've watched that episode, then you know. But if you haven't, you should watch it right now. I mentioned how important it is to have a good, healthy, well-rounded lunch. Halfway through the day. Lunch is a very important, an underestimated meal of the day. I always talk about breakfast and dinner. Lunch is important, guys. And you should never have a DeBrand ice cream sundae only for lunch. No chocolate lunches will ever happen on this marketing team ever again. We all came back to the office and we were bouncing off the walls and crashing in all different places.
And the day was over.
So the context for that was we met at DeBrand for a meeting around lunchtime, and some people hadn't eaten lunch yet. And of course we all got DeBrand Sundays.
Kathy's
and then
so
the rest
generous.
of the day,
the peanut butter.
The rest of the day was a drag.
It was a
but
tough
it
one.
was it worth it, Jonathan?
Yeah, of course.
I would like to point out I was not invited to this lunch.
Yeah, you were.
So I'd like to say I don't think it was worth it.
It was.
You've still got room to have your chocolate lunch experience.
Yeah, I came in this morning and you were eating DeBrands. What are you talking about?
I'll see you guys later.
Okay.
Chocolate breakfast.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to kind of a year one recap in maybe the stats and the episodes that we had this year. And so first and foremost, I want to address all of our new listeners because I know that we've grown a lot as a channel throughout this year and not everyone has watched us from the beginning. So first of all, welcome. If you are newer, if this is one of the first episodes you're watching, this is a great one to watch because we'll give you kind of an overview, a lot of the episodes we did so you can go back and watch the ones that interest you. But just as an overview, kind of to share a lot of the topics that we've covered. I know a lot of people, because we are an economic development organization, they're like, oh, that's all you talk about. So I thought I would tell you some of the topics that we cover and see if you're interested in any of them, because it's a lot bigger than you probably are expecting. So of course, economic development has been a topic. Baseball and the Tin Caps, our local baseball team, leadership, entrepreneurship, feature filmmaking, airports, digital creators, influencers, housing, communication, the music industry, women's health care, architecture, and chocolate, of course. But that's just like an overview of some of the topics. And so really, our podcast is for everyone. You know, there's topics and guests that we have on that I think can relate to anybody who is listening. So a big thing about our podcast that we're super proud of is that so far this year, we've had solely organic growth with really no budget.
Zero.
At all. Zero. And so within this year, we've gained 7,000 subscribers and we've had over 20,000 people listen or watch our podcast, which is just such a like rewarding feeling after, like you said, going through months and months of prepping this and pouring our heart and soul into it.
We had a lot set aside for promotion, but Hannah blew it all on equipment.
Well, okay, let me first address.
Yeah, let me show her.
Blew it all on equipment, but we don't have a fifth mic. We hit a limitation today that we might have to work on next year.
If only we knew who to go to about budgets.
So keep
wait.
watching so we can get another microphone.
Yes, please like and subscribe so that I can update this little love into something more exciting.
You know what, though? It's a good point. I think, you know, anybody, I really firmly believe that anybody can do a podcast. I don't know if anybody can do it well. And I think that when we put this together, you're taking a bunch of strangers with seemingly disparate skill sets and trying to make something happen and get the numbers. So
Yeah. And I think something that's fun and exciting about this like day and age is that by a large percentage, our listeners / watchers are on YouTube, not necessarily Spotify or Apple. We do have listeners on there and that's awesome. But a lot of people want the visual aspect to a podcast. And so it's cool to get that opportunity to do that on YouTube along with promoting it on Shorts.
Yeah, right. And I think, you know, and again, if I haven't said this enough to you guys about how proud I am of not just the show, but of each of you guys, I hope I tell you guys that every day because I do mean it. I think it's been a surprise to me. I can only imagine what's going to happen in 2025 because now our legs are under us. You guys set this room up in a matter of 20 minutes. That's sound, that's lighting, that's cameras. That's unheard of. So set up, tear down. Those are the things that the average person doesn't see that goes in behind the scenes. But it's working. We're getting some momentum. And even people on the street are stopping me and saying, hey, I saw your show. I think it's the glasses.
Might be the hat.
It might be the hat. It might be the NASA jacket. I don't know.
Always wearing the gear.
Yes.
So I guess just like one little fun fact, I know Jonathan's already touched on like the studio and the team a little bit. But just to bounce off of that, you guys had built out this studio when we got there. Part of my interview was going into the studio and being like, what would you do in this? And it's a tight studio. I don't know if that shows on camera. A lot of people are surprised if they've seen our show and then they see our studio.
I hope we can show a shot of this so that they know what we're talking about because
I don't know if we have a lens wide enough to show
it's
the
an illusion.
teeniness.
The whole thing is an illusion. It is. It looks like we're in a much bigger place.
And so some of the gear was purchased before I got there, and some of it was fantastic gear. But there was one little hiccup that I find very amusing, and I do bring up as a joke sometimes. But one of the cameras for the podcast was a GoPro, and so I think that's a testament to how small the studio was at that time.
You literally couldn't see everybody.
You couldn't see everybody
unless you used a GoPro with like a fisheye lens.
Yes, and so it took a couple months of like engineering and figuring out the space to get rid of the GoPro and get some better cameras for that. But
by the way, it wasn't just a small room; it was a small budget.
Yes.
So, and thanks again to the help that we got twice from Barrett McNagny and Sweetwater.
For sure. Like that studio would not be what it was without them.
And it wouldn't be what it was without you.
Mm-hmm. And so I just want to throw that tidbit in there. If you are anyone who knows anything about podcasting and gear, it's funny. So 2 more things I wanted to touch on in this section were some of our most viewed shorts / shows. So our 3 most viewed shows were Ariana McGee, who is from Navigate Maternity. First Pioneer. Julia Christ, who is an influencer in this region that we had on the podcast, and Laura Cruz, who works at our office. Those were our 3 most popular. And so if you're looking for a place to start or jump in, those would be some great ones. I mean, Ariana's podcast, we can talk about that one. That was kind of like our like hit success from this year.
Yeah, that was the turning point for sure.
It
And
was.
I don't know I'm interested in what you guys think about that. My feeling, having gotten to know her from that first phone call she put into me, where she said, "Hey, I heard I've been nominated for your award, and I don't know if my story's good enough." And then she wins the whole thing. But I think just the way she came across, so honest and talking about almost dying. And how her mom and the doctors saved her, three kids in 3 years, and then working on the fourth. I mean, it takes a toll on the body. I think that her humanization of her own story was the turning point for me.
Yeah, I think anybody that you retell that story to, like, or if they've come across the episode, they're just like, wow, that is inspiring. It's a wild story. Obviously, I think that's the reason why it blew up was just it's a crazy story that she was able to come out on the other side, and
Well,
that's
plus she was very honest about the obstacles in front of her, both human and non-human. I mean,
Yeah.
she was dealing with people that didn't want to believe in her, and it's a small step for us collectively, but I'll tell you, we did a really good job collectively of supporting her. Ryan, actually, would you mind talking about that real quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah. She was looking to set up some pilot relationships with some healthcare institutions. And through some of the work that we've done, we partner pretty closely with a hospital in Steuben County called Cameron Memorial. And so we were able to connect Ariana to Cameron Memorial. And they're a smaller, independent, rural hospital, which is almost exactly the type of people that Ariana's product and company can help. So it was a really great relationship.
Yeah, and thank God for you on that one, because when she came to me and she said Kentucky was picking it up, I'm like, that's got to start here, man. That's where Pioneer starts.
Nice. But yeah, her episode was amazing. You can see just in the views how touching the story was and how many people could relate to that. We got thousands of comments of support and like interest in her organization.
And it's also helped her, because she came back to us and was like, you guys have helped me out. And like she came back to us like, hey, can we do more to promote this? And then because she started getting more inquiries about her business and stuff like that.
She called me over the weekend and
Right.
said, hey, are you guys doing something about me right now, because my websites are blowing up?
Yeah, which is ultimately the goal of this podcast,
Exactly.
is to be a platform for our region.
Exactly. We're here to help.
Yeah.
And if they've got a compelling story, we've got a talented enough team here that we know how to magnify it.
Yeah. And so one last thing I'll hit on is just kind of like projecting for 2025. We have a whole new year. We're going to have new guests, more impactful stories, but we want your feedback. So, of course, your support in a subscription and liking and commenting, but also just if you have any guest suggestions that you want us to have on this podcast, if you have any questions or topics that you want us to cover, like we're all ears. We want this to be serving our community and serving the region. And so we'd love your input in that. That was kind of just a shout out to next year to be excited for.
All right, so let's go a little bit more in depth with some of the specific episodes that we had over the year. What were some of your guys' favorite quotes, stories over the last year? Callie, what was one of your favorite quotes this year?
One of my favorite quotes, it's a little more of a funny one, but it was one where we had it happened on the show. Hannah made a short of it, and then I just could not get it out of my head. Like all the time, it was just replaying in my brain for months, it felt like. But we had an episode with Jonathan and two members of our BD team, Jackson and Eileen at the time. And Jackson had talked about, I forget exactly all of the context, but somebody had run into Charles Barkley somewhere. I don't know how that
that's
happened.
right. Yeah.
But
I forgot about that.
they were wearing an NEI shirt with the typical logo that Ryan's got on his. And Charles Barkley comes up to him and says, Indiana, but the corner of Indiana. And that was so funny to me for so long. The corner of Indiana.
It's very quotable.
He really had to think about it. He was like, I know that's Indiana, but it seems like I'm going to the corner here today.
Which, I mean, that shows the marketing is effective.
It's working.
You want people to know where we're at.
You're
There we
welcome,
are.
society.
The corner of Indiana. That's us.
One of my favorite episodes to be a part of, and then like the information in it was the Paris McFarling podcast. I mean, he was a Pioneer of the Year nominee the first year, and then you referenced Jonathan multiple times in that podcast as just like the quotes that he had, just speaking about leadership, and that's what that podcast was about. Just because he thinks it's not so much just what he said, but just how he said it, and just the way that he thinks about things differently. I thought was pretty inspiring, and was just like a different way to think about leadership in certain aspects and certain decisions that can be made. And I know it made an impact on you as well, because you referenced his Pioneer video, multiple times throughout that, just because those quotes were just different than what we'd heard previously.
I've never that's where Hoosier humility is at its best, was when, and I won't say his quote right, I know it, but he talked about creating a lane next to the lane he's in, so that he makes it wide enough for people to pass him. And I think that he's one of those people that inspires me, because he's teaching the people on his team to take over for him. And I think you can't say there's nothing more powerful than that confident humility that he displayed.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought just the way, his story of, losing both of his parents in different ways. One was, sudden, one was over time with a diagnosis and stuff like that. He was just full of wisdom. And I definitely stepped away from that podcast thinking, man, this is one of our good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the episodes that I got to be a part of and host was with Zach Vessels, who's the creator of Creator Space. One of the favorite quotes, I wrote it down so I wouldn't mess it up, that he says. So he has this organization and event that welcomes creators throughout the region to kind of come together and have this networking event. And so when I asked him, like, who is this for, this organization in this time? And he said, it's a wide net because I believe everyone deep down is creative. And I just feel like that's just such a good perspective that I don't think is often held, like, within the creative community. Sometimes
Yeah.
it feels very exclusive. Like,
Exclusive and territorial.
you have to have gone to film school and do this and accomplish this to be a part of this like niche thing. But he was just describing the different people who are part of it. He's like, there's contractors, there's costume designer, like creativity doesn't have to just look digital, like, you might assume. I just think his perspective on that was just really inspiring.
And it was like of a certain age too. Like they're open to like the youth all the way up to elderly as well. That was another thing that was like being inclusive in that.
Moving on to a different Zach, the podcast that unfortunately I didn't get to be a part of hosting that one, but I did have a chance to watch it with Zach Benedict from MKM Architecture and Design. Brice and our colleague Jacob hosted that one, and Brice asked a really interesting question about as an architect, when you think of design, do you design to deliberately nudge people into a certain behavior activity? And kind of expecting the answer to be no, Zach immediately responded, absolutely. And then he went on to explain why. And one of the things that he really dove into is health and wellness indicators of an individual can really correlate kind of ridiculously highly to zip code. So where you live kind of is a leading indicator of how long your life expectancy, your health outcomes. But one of the ways to combat that is to increase the frequency of unplanned positive interactions. And so they do a lot of thinking when they're deliberately designing not just buildings, but spaces and campuses on how do you create and nudge people into these positive, more frequent, unplanned interactions to help overcome some of those health and wellness personal indicators. I just thought that was a beautifully put sentiment and a really powerful question. Thanks for asking that, Brice.
Yeah, I think because one of the examples was like, if on like a college campus, these college kids are like cutting through the grass and making their own path. Well, let's just build a sidewalk. So these kids just are already taking this path. So let's just build that, and they'll continue with interaction and stuff like that. So it was definitely a very interesting podcast, because I'm not an architecture person. So being a part of that podcast was definitely, I learned a lot in that podcast. Let's go on to some impactful stories. I know we already talked about Ariana a little bit, and just how inspiring her story was. But I know, Callie, you had, one of our very first podcasts that we recorded. It was one of our, I think, fourth or fifth release, was, just the stories of Laura, who's originally from Colombia. And as we're recording this right now, she's currently there. So talk a little bit more about learning about Laura, because obviously you'd only been here for a couple months. You got to learn about, one of our most entertaining, unique employees here.
Yeah, Laura's definitely become a friendly face around the office for me, but at the time I didn't know her all that well. She's obviously kind to anybody that she comes in contact with, which is why she's a great person to be sitting up at the front desk in our office. But I really loved the opportunity to get to talk to Laura in that setting, because it was like a forced, let me really get to know you and get to know not just like the small talk things that when you get hired somewhere, you might have a one-on-one lunch with somebody and just, understand where they went to school and where they grew up and what do they like to do for fun. But that podcast was really awesome to kind of get an in-depth look into who Laura is and what makes her her. And it was really cool throughout my whole, I would say, friendship with Laura this far. It's been really cool to learn about her culture back in Colombia, some different things that are important to her and her family, that are not necessarily things that I think about all the time, or even just learning things like we'll say something where there's like a slang term and she's like, that doesn't make any sense. Like it literally, like you're saying the opposite of what you mean. And I'm like, you're right. That really doesn't make any sense. And so that's been fun, and she's super awesome. Her story is really impactful. So
Watching the confusion on her face when I explained party pooper to her.
Party pooper?
Yeah.
Oh.
You never heard of the term party
No,
pooper? Oh,
I
I
was
was saying
making
it.
sure
She
I
goes,
heard you.
"What?" I'm like,
Those words
See,
don't go
that
together.
sounds really weird.
Yeah.
Sure they do. I'm
Yeah.
from Chicago.
Yeah.
It's just normal to us, but we're like, oh, yeah, that is really strange. That is a strange thing to say.
So, in a very different sort of context, we had Jonathan and I hosted the podcast with Jeff Osterman. He's the Chief People and Culture Officer at Sweetwater Sound. Thank you, Sweetwater Sound, for helping us with our equipment here. Jeff is a tremendous leader and was just really inspirational. And one of the things I love most about these interviews that we do on this podcast is the introspection that we get out of our hosts or out of our guests. And Jeff was certainly no exception to that. But he talked about, Jeff was a very competitive swimmer, and he talked about a coach that he had that was really hard on him and really hard on a lot of the swim team, but there was a deep-seated and very obvious emotional connection and care and belief that, as hard as this coach was on Jeff, what he took from that was, this guy believes in me more than I believe in myself.
Yeah.
And so he found something more in himself because of the type of leadership he had and the relationship he had with this coach, and the trust and authenticity from that coach is what really made that possible. And so I don't think, knowing Jeff just a little bit that we got to meet him, I can't imagine he's the kind of hard-nosed, drive his
No.
people, but being able to see that and adapt his leadership style as a result of that lesson was really awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Confidence in self-spokenness. He
Mhm.
was there to share. He knew that that's what he needed at that point in time, but that's not what he gives now. He's got his own twist on it, and I thought that was very powerful.
I think one more impactful story that I want to touch on before we wrap up this segment is Michelle Gladio. Callie and I got to host that podcast. She is the author of a book about communicating with courage. So obviously she's a very great speaker and a very inspirational storyteller. But one story that really stuck out to me, Callie, you were asking about the cover of the book because it had a sailboat on it. And you're like, does it have any significance? And she goes on to say that the sailboat on the front was kind of like a tribute to her mom, who in her 60s, one day she just came to her parents' house, and there's the sailboat in the front yard. And she's like, whose sailboat is this? What sailboat is this? And apparently she had just seen it in someone's yard for sale. And she's like, you know what? I want to start sailing. I just want to learn that, in her 60s. So she just like courageously took this risk. And something that she said from that she learned from her mom was how to take risks, but also that life isn't over at any decade. Like you're never too old or too far to like try something new, take a risk. So I just thought that was really powerful.
That is a really cool one, because even me, as I'm still in my early 20s, there's plenty of things now that I'm like, I'm an adult. I can't like try that thing out anymore. Like I got to move on and make sure I'm, paying the bills and whatever. But that story really was like okay, like maybe I will try that out. Maybe I'll go for it.
Speaking of trying things out, for us being in this first year of this podcast, there was a lot of I would say, successful markers along the way for us to pull off, certain episodes. And I think probably one of the first ones was with LC Nature Park, and that was because that was the first time we're taking the show on the road, so to speak. We actually recorded that out there with them, and Hannah, you can speak to more because there was definitely challenges with lighting
Yeah.
and mic and because we're
Especially in that building.
in that
Uh-huh.
building, which is
Not made for
It's
this.
a beautiful building, but it
Yes.
is not a video
Yeah,
studio.
exactly.
It is
Very
not.
nature forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I
So-
think kind of like the heart behind that decision is for other episodes, we've kind of thrown around the idea of like, should we try to take it like off location to show, a certain aspect of who we're interviewing? And it just never really worked out until this. And since LC Nature Park is a nature preserve, there's just so much natural beauty there. And they have like this nice barn building. And we just really wanted to incorporate that and show that off. And so, yeah, we kind of did that. We kind of, I don't know, just did it and hoped it worked. I mean, there's definitely things I would change about it now, but I think it really showed that our show is like versatile enough to go on the road and also, support people in the region who maybe have a more unique venue.
Yeah, and we've done that twice now.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think our second one chronologically was at PFW, Purdue Fort Wayne. They were gracious enough. Purdue Fort Wayne hosted the housing symposium that the Northeast Indiana
Which
Strategic
went over like
Development.
gangbusters.
Yeah, it
by
was
the-
the Strategic Development Commission hosted that. We helped put it together along with some other colleagues of ours, including Heather Presley Cowan. But Jonathan and I had a chance to host the podcast with the keynote speaker for the housing symposium, Chuck Marone with Strong Towns, to talk about the importance of residential development on community and economic development. And it was just I thought we had a really interesting conversation with Chuck.
Me too. And I think it's probably one of the best decisions I've made was to relinquish control to you on that one, because
Oh yeah, I
that
forgot
was
I was the lead host on
because
that.
we walked in there and I was going to take it. And then you and I started talking and I was like, man, this guy knows way more about this than I do. Congratulations. You're promoted.
One of
You
the-
did an outstanding
Well, I
job, though, as
appreciate
always.
that. One of the really fun things about that, though, is realizing potentially how far along our region is on
Yeah.
our journey towards residential development. Because I think there were some things that even surprised Chuck a little bit, and how far we are in that story. But
For sure.
what was really the other thing I really loved about that is we kind of kicked it off with that podcast with Chuck, but we were able to follow it up. Brice, did you host that one with? Did you and Jake co-host with Heather?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was Jonathan and Jacob, again, our colleague who couldn't be here today, co-hosted with Heather to talk about housing development and her story. She was one of our earlier pioneer kind of pilot videos.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right. She was the second one we ever did.
But then, even being able to build on that again with the Zach Benedict podcast that I talked about. So having sort of a series around housing has just been really awesome.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to harp on. And like as a success, like yes, the off-road one, at PFW, but also being able to like work within our different departments and like, you guys have an event, how can we collaborate with that? And because we already had the podcast that was fully functioning, it'd be like, oh, let's just move this piece here. We don't have to like build it from the ground up for this moment. It's there and we're working together and moving in the same direction. So that felt like a big success internally for us.
Yeah, and I think another successful part is we're able to take, like you said with Jake, and we have Jackson, who's also, co-hosted a couple of shows as well with you, Jonathan, and bringing in certain site selectors here to, talk more about the region. And I think that was, be a success as well, because we did like a collab podcast with Devin Hills and Smith, because he hosts his own podcast. So, we were on that, but you were on his podcast and he was on our podcast. So doing that sort of thing, and again, taking another risk or, so to speak, and doing something like that and having it be successful.
Okay, what's Devin's podcast?
Site selectors are people too.
Yes.
Just wanted to, I was
Yeah.
prepping a
was that-
shout
was
out.
that- lobbing in a softball.
I knew the answer.
Then
Yeah.
we had Devin and Sabrina, who were both
Yeah.
partners that BD brought in.
That's right. Those guys, and it's interesting because the average person out there, I don't know if they really understand what a site selector does. You don't just go out and point at a hole and say, here, you can build a building here. There's a lot more to it. And that was pretty eye-opening to me. And I think it was, ironically, it was so eye-opening to me that we as a team realized where the hole was. And the hole was everybody is sending the site selectors the same content. Here's a building, here's a property, here's the power you can get to it. But there's no history, there's no story, there's no proximity necessarily. And I think out of that, we built a technological solution where they could self-select and tell us how we should be communicating with them. Do you want SMS versus email? What day of the week is best for you? What types of content do you want? So now we've got them all in that preference setting, and that never would have happened had we not reciprocated shows and done it that way.
Yeah,
So
'cause-
we partner with BD, we partner with regional initiatives. You know, we're this one moving unit now, and I feel like this year really shows that off.
It feels-
Fluid. I
well,
would say fluid.
It feels like we're firing on all cylinders. I mean,
Yeah.
just organizationally around this platform.
Yeah.
Along, some of the successes that we've had, we've also had some surprises along the way, with some of the stories, and just tidbits of information that have come out to the podcast. And I know, Callie, you came away with one that was most surprising to you, because the Scott Henderman podcast with the Fort Wayne International Airport, you fly out of the airport quite a bit, and you had no idea of some of the stuff that he mentioned in that podcast.
Yeah, that was a really cool one. It wasn't necessarily a topic that I was like thinking that I would take a lot from, because we're going to talk about airplanes and some things like that, and I know nothing about aviation. I never have. That's not my thing. So I sat in that podcast, and I always love any topic that we talk about, because I always learn something. But this one in particular, I didn't think about how it would kind of hit close to home a little bit for me, since I live my family lives out of state. I do travel out of the Fort Wayne airport very frequently, and I was seeing all the construction that they were doing, and they're making updates and stuff, but being able to hear from Scott exactly what all those things are, and the attention to detail, and the different things they're taking into consideration with like going above and beyond ADA compliance and things like that, was really, really cool and eye-opening, and it makes me feel like even more proud to fly out of the Fort Wayne airport every time. So yeah, that one's awesome.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest surprises for me was, again, along with the successes, we were able to pull off, a kind of another series with the Tin Caps. We had that 2-part series back in April, and we had some challenges setting up that podcast, because we reached out to them like, hey, we want to do a podcast with you, and they're like, hey, we want 4 people to be on the podcast. And as we mentioned, that studio is not big enough to have a couple of hosts, 4 people. And so we broke it up into a 2-part podcast, and we did it on different topics, the history of the Tin Caps, and then what they do on, it's kind of a game day basis, or this season, this past season. So that was another, surprise on our end. They had some really good stories of, catalyzing downtown, and just having it be the point in time where all this downtown renovation was, for the Tin Caps were kind of the start of that, and we highlighted that as well. And then with Logan Weening from Old Fort Baseball Company, just as being a sports guy, I knew about some of the teams like the Fort Wayne Daisies, or the Fort Wayne Fury, the pro basketball team that was here, or the Zollner Pistons that were in the NBA all the way back in the 50s. But his in-depth knowledge about those teams and specific people and stories on those teams were, something that I didn't even know, and I think, and hopefully, were educational for people interested in that sort of stuff. So
Mine was Lance. So Lance was both of your professors, and I think he's head of the film school there. Is that
Yeah,
right?
he's Dean of the Arts, so
Dean of the
it's
Arts.
all
Okay.
DMA, and he oversees graphic design a little bit.
And I got to tell you, so I've become pretty good friends with Lance, over the year and a half that I've known him. But I'll tell you something. What really surprised me about him was, I think it was easy to underestimate him. It's not easy to come into a university and say, we're going to make real feature films. And I just like you, I went to
The premiere? No.
no, I wasn't at the premiere. I was at the
You
secondary
saw it
premiere.
at the theater.
But it was at the theater, and I got to tell you, he made me sit right next to him. He talked me through every scene, and it was one of those things where I was like, I can watch this dude. But
you're getting the bonus features.
But I'm getting the bonus. I'm
live.
getting the narrative.
you get the
and
commentary,
Lance,
right?
why don't you run and get some popcorn, would you?
Lance, his passion is so compelling and contagious. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have met you two. And the way he talked about you guys, like you walked on water, if nothing else, I was like, I got to meet these guys. And I just think for the miracle that he pulled off out of Little Huntington University to actually get Stephen Baldwin and some other known people into his movie to tell his personal story, that was my surprise. I didn't know that was his story. I think you were the one who told me that, Callie. He's a really super good guy. His heart is in the right place, and the guy's got skills. So that, to me, that whole package was thrilling for me to host that one.
Now, my surprise, switching gears entirely, is to attorneys. Just kidding. Insert lawyer joke. I'm allowed to do that as a non-practicing attorney. But I was really surprised. Our first episode that we've done like kind of a prelim with Stefan, but the first official one was with James Kahn from Obakai Restaurant Group and co-hosted but with Mark Baines from Barrett McNabb.
And Mark is a natural.
Mark is a natural.
He was great.
But the big surprise was how much convincing it took the team over at Barrett McNagney to get an attorney to want to be on a podcast. These are people.
I thought you were going to say the beer, by the way.
Well,
but okay. That was a surprise
the
too.
big, because I went to law school with Mark. I've known Mark for years. I've never known him to be shy with a turn of phrase, but boy, was it hard to get them. They just kept saying, nobody wants to hear about us. What we do is so boring. And we're like, I think just try and tell your story a little bit, because I think there's a lot here. And Mark can turn. He can weave a tale.
He is, and I'll tell you something. Half of being an attorney is asking the right questions, and he's charismatic enough, but he's got a presence. And I ran into him at lunch a couple weeks ago, and I said, "Hey, we would gladly have you back to host something with us." So we'll just have to pick a victim and see who we want to interview with him, because he's great.
The other surprise, that please go watch that episode, because James was kind enough to have someone deliver over some Gnometown beer for the podcast.
I thought, I thought that's what you were going to say
delivery.
when you said I was surprised how long it took. I thought you were going to be facetious, because you said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if we had some beer?" James gets on the phone and some guy runs up here with a bunch of beer for us.
But you know what? That was a good learning moment for me as a producer, because then I started including like a question when they sign up for doing the podcast is like, do you have a physical product? Would you like to bring it in for the show?
Yeah.
And we've done that several times, like having their product or just displayed or drinking it or whatever it is.
Yeah, and you mentioned DeBrand. The amount of candy she brought in here, the amount of chocolates she brought in here was astounding. So I think we got some shots of that in the show, right? Yeah, excellent.
We've definitely learned a lot. There's been a lot of really awesome and impactful moments on the show, but there's also been some goofy moments and some mess ups and slip ups, some things that have been a little bit funny that make us laugh here in the office. And
Mostly Jonathan.
Mostly Jonathan. But here is kind of a quick reel of some funny moments that we've had on the show so far.
We're getting our live reactions.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan Sackett. Jonathan Sackett. We've got more notes on you than all of our other guests combined. It should be interesting.
And Charles Barkley pointed at his shirt and said, "Indiana, but the corner of Indiana."
Just stole my marketing strategy. In the corner of Indiana.
In the corner, upper right, if we could.
Wow. Well, we're ending this right now, because I am a pillow guy.
You cannot violate this principle in film or television, right? You cannot have two people sitting in a scene agreeing with each other.
I don't agree.
No, you're wrong. See the drama.
See,
the
you
spike,
can feel the tension
right
in here.
There's another line from a poem that goes something like, "I waited and waited only to find dismayed that any salary I would have asked of life would have gladly paid." Yeah.
This is the Stepford
idea.
Jackson today, I'm afraid. I don't know where this is coming from. Dude.
What?
I feel comfortable calling you John.
I'm glad you do.
So, and you can call me John.
No, I'm going to call you Sacco.
Sackett?
Sackett, that's right, Sackett.
Look on my face.
Oh boy, you just gave my team a whole bunch of
Artillery. Great,
Well,
thank
Jeff,
you.
if you can give out discounts, he did steal my distortion pedal.
Oh,
That's
okay.
true.
All
He
right.
will not give it back.
We'll
and
talk
I'm not
about
even-
that after
All
the
right, we'll
show.
talk
Very
about
nice.
that. Who knows? Bring a couple of pedals. Maybe we can find
Yeah.
a home.
In my defense,
maybe we
it's
can
a
find a
great
home for them.
pedal.
Yeah, you enjoy it. What just happened? I can't help but feel like I'm at the butt end of most of that, but okay.
So yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely a lot of funny moments. I I don't know. Did anybody have a favorite of those funny moments?
Jonathan's a pillow guy.
Jonathan's a
That
pillow
line
guy.
I don't
stuck
know where
out to
that
me.
came from. I remember not seeing that again. I remembered looking at Lance and he said, I mean, you can't tell a story with two people just sitting there and just agreeing with everything. And I go, I don't agree. And it was funny because just that second pause that he looked at me like he was going to ask me, what don't you agree with?
He's like, wait,
And
what?
forget it.
And I will say with that last part with Jeff about the distortion pedal, there was more instances that you brought it up. It seemed like a big
At
deal
least
to you.
12 times.
Yeah, I
in the
only chose
episode.
2, but it seemed like a big deal. Is there still tension here? I think the audience needs to know.
Well,
Are you guys
okay.
friends?
Tell the story.
No, you tell the story. You're the one who stole it.
Okay, so one time I was over at Jonathan's apartment and I said, wow, that's a really nice distortion pedal. He said, yeah, you can borrow it. I said, okay, cool. And I immediately took it. I put it in my
He
bag.
took it borrow as have.
How long ago would you?
That was a year and a half ago.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Hey, that was 18 months, 6 days, 5 minutes. No. But
Why don't you
Did you-
open it?
did you really bring in the? Oh, you did. Now I feel bad. You can have it back. I just want. Now you took away my one complaint, so now I have to give it back to you. Besides that,
It's
I
way better than mine.
yeah. Besides that, I like the songs that you were writing around that. So
And now Jeff doesn't have to buy you guys a bunch of distortion
well,
pedals.
I didn't say that.
No.
Yeah, he
Okay,
still
sorry,
has.
never
to.
I'm
mind.
just glad we don't have to carry that tension into the next season because it's
It
running.
was,
We'll
it
carry
was
it.
eating at me.
It's a little rough.
We still will.
On another completely related note, we have had some successes. What?
It's a completely related note.
Completely unrelated. Definitely had some funny moments, some things that didn't quite go as planned. But overall, I think the sentiment around the show has been very positive. We've kind of talked about that a little bit, but I have a very unique perspective on some of those things just because I'm doing a lot of the communication with each guest before and after each show is filmed, making sure that they know what's going on and they're prepared when they come in. And once we give them a link to the show to go watch or to approve or something, they always have something to say about it, and it's all been super, super positive. I think a lot of people are surprised by how professional is the word that sometimes they use, and I think they just think that I feel like everyone has a podcast and they've got it in their bedroom. They've got a microphone set up and they just call their friend and say, hey, will you come over and be on the show? And they just talk. But typically when I send over all of the materials on the front end and different things like that, and I have them go through a scheduler to put their filming on the calendar and stuff, they are always commenting on the professionalism of it. A lot of people say they love our social medias, specifically the look of them, and that's also a nod to Ashton, our digital designer, for all the thumbnails and things like that we put on there, and Hannah for making the show look so aesthetically pleasing and it all matches, and people love that, and they appreciate how prepared we are and how much we communicate with them beforehand. Like, they know exactly what they're getting themselves into when they walk in the studio.
Yeah, and I think with the sound bites that we're using for business development outreach, the sound bites that we're using for shorts, things like that, I think everybody, at the end of the day, people want to be in good company with good people, right? Can we give you the land here? Can we get you the power? Can we get you the water? Whatever you need on those things, yes. But at the end of the day, if you don't like the people and the climate and the things that are going on around there, that's what we're here to do. I said it before, we're here to magnify those things, but it takes a lot of preparation, to your point, Callie, and it's paying off. I mean, people are really enjoying the people that we're bringing in to talk about what they did, and that's the goal. You want to be in good company, be around these people, hear their story, and share your story with us as well.
And a phrase that I came up with a long time ago is try and surprise people with the truth.
Oh, that was yours? I wonder where you stole it from.
But
To surprise people with the truth.
Johnny Sacco has been saying sorry, Chuck. Jonathan
Oh,
has been
great.
saying since the day he started here, it's all about surprising people with the truth. And I think that's what Northeast Indiana really has the stories that are just here, the people that are here, and being able to really tell those stories. And so Indiana, but in the corner, there's some pretty cool stuff happening up here.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think another thing with the feedback, and it's not just outside of our offices, but internal as well. I know on numerous amount of occasions we'd be coming here for our Monday morning meeting, and Nick Dara on our team would come in and say, hey guys, I listened to the podcast. this one was awesome. You know, I wasn't expecting, like we've all said, I wasn't expecting, you know, to learn about this bit, but this is like, and it just goes to show the variety of topics we can hit and do it at a high level. And I think at least something that I've noticed after, you know, watching and reviewing every single show over the course of the year is that the podcast has gotten better. I know that, you know, even if you look at like the first couple episodes, each of us has gotten more comfortable behind a microphone. Maybe not you. You're always, you know,
You're
Hi
ready
there.
to go.
you're always
ready to go.
you're always ready to go. But
I
you
have
know,
a lot of issues, though.
you know, maybe some of us had some nervousness coming into those first episodes recording or something like that. But you know, as we're sitting around the table here, we're all like joking with each other and laughing. Like that's just the comfort level, and I think that's what makes our show better. And I'm excited for where the show is going to continue to go.
The only thing I would add to that, Brice, is that, you know, it's aside from surprising people with the truth, is I've always believed that if you work with the best, you always win, or if you work with your friends, you always have fun. And with this group, I feel like we've got both.
And I really can't think of a better way to like wrap up this like first season of the podcast and this first year of the podcast than doing our own rapid wrap up questions. And we haven't necessarily received any questions in the comments. Like, I wonder what the host answers are, but I imagine that's what everyone is wondering.
Yeah, of
so I
course.
thought we'd go ahead and answer that here on this last episode.
So this is my duty in the podcast that I've been able to host. This is the one thing they trusted me with at the beginning. So
Well,
I think Jonathan trusted you with.
Fair
We
enough.
Yeah,
trusted
okay,
Ryan.
thank
fair
you.
enough. So I'm going to go rapid fire around the table. Tin caps or comments? Callie, start.
Tin caps.
Tin caps.
tin caps.
comments.
I knew she was going to go
I've
comments.
never been to a comments game.
I did. It's not just to be different. Hockey is just its own thing.
I'm not going out on a limb like that.
What's yours?
Fine. Comments. The only because, and I'm just going to throw this out there, the nachos at the comments games are fantastic. Not that the nachos at Tin Caps games aren't, but the nachos at the comments games.
See, I like the fights personally.
DeBrand's or Coney Island?
DeBrand.
DeBrand.
Coney Island.
It's a brand.
Coney Island.
Yes.
I'm not going against Kathy on that, man.
Where would you take someone to eat, Brice?
Cat
Going-
Blue.
Coming to you.
Tequila.
The Stand or Charlie's Place?
Oyster Bar.
Baker Street or Paula's on Main. Both are good.
Finally, NEI bucket list item. Sackett.
The tobogganing, I think that's in Steuben County. Yep.
I'm going to go LC Nature Park.
The J&O Pick and Patch.
That's a good one.
It's my favorite.
I'd say a concert at the Clyde.
Oh, there you go.
I have never been to, Buckeye Ranch in Angola. It used to be this major country music venue a while ago, and I've never been there.
Well, I think that brings us to the end, guys. So thank you, team. Thank you again, everybody. It was a great 2024. I can't tell you guys know where I came from, what my background was. We exceeded my expectations by far. All of you guys did individually and as a team. And thank you for joining us. Please interact with us. Tell us what you want to hear. Tell us your stories. Tell us what you thought of the wrap-up show. Tell us what you thought of my jacket. I don't care. We just want your feedback. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and of course, pioneerstartshere.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's together look forward to an even better 2025. Thanks, everybody. Whoa! Bang!